Buonasera, ladies and gentlemen. We are not live, but I am bringing to you what I promised, which are my views on how I felt and my reaction to Kamala Harris being named as the nominee for the vice presidency of the United States. So it's raw, but here you go. Kamala Harris is no Michelle Obama. I wasn't enthused when Joe Biden became the Democratic nominee for U.S. president. That's an understatement. I stated emphatically that I could not vote for Joe Biden. Then Biden selected Kamala Harris as his running mate. My view has not changed. I'm a black female millennial, U.S. citizen and voter. My family did not immigrate to the United States. My family was brought to the United States on slave ships. We continue to suffer under racist policies and discrimination in hiring, healthcare, U.S. courts, education, and housing. There is not a single aspect of American life that is unmarred by racism, perpetuated and condoned by the U.S. government. And this view is not my own. You can't possibly believe that the George Floyd protests are simply about the killing of one man. The protests are about the systemic, prolific, unjustified, and unredressed denial of civil and human rights to black descendants of U.S. slavery. This is an injury and denial quite distinct from the desires and demands of black individuals who immigrate to the United States of their own will to build a life better than that available to them in the lands which they are fleeing. Black American descendants of U.S. slavery have always been on the front lines of the fight for the soul of this nation. We have been stripped of dignity, denied redress, and even the most basic right to plead our injuries and be justly compensated for what we have suffered. Instead, individuals from almost every corner of the globe have settled on a consensus that black descendants of U.S. slavery are complaining without merit that we are lazy and greedily asking for handouts for injuries that are not that bad. This racist and ignorant consensus, eagerly agreed to by our neighbors for fear that their slice of the American pie may be reduced, culminates with the false belief that other injured non-black groups currently in America, i.e. Jews, Italians, the Irish, and Hispanics, pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Of course, they overlook key facts, for example, that such groups fled the horrific conditions and lands of their abusers. Holocaust survivors are compensated, and U.S. law provides protections for immigrants fleeing their abusive countries, and Native Americans receive U.S. government recognition of sovereignty. Our purpose here today is not to assess or compare whether the aid received by injured groups is sufficient or just. Today, we must simply acknowledge that other non-black injured groups have received some aid and support to dispel the most ridiculous notion that black descendants of U.S. slavery should be required to cure injuries which they did not themselves inflict. No other group has been made to suffer the injury, injustice, and insult the way that black descendants of U.S. slavery are being asked to shoulder a burden unjust and unseen in history, and by the very institution which committed the crime. Where does this leave us, America, black descendants of U.S. slavery? The U.S. media and television personalities laud Kamala Harris as some sort of savior for U.S. black women and the black community, but the opposite is true. In fact, Kamala's selection reaffirms all of the reasons that Joe Biden is wrong for America and why Kamala is dead wrong for America. Poor judgment, entitled, self-serving, and self-dealing, Biden remains utterly unqualified for the office of U.S. president. Biden has never been up for the top job and has built an entire career being a backseat driver for those of qualification and character. Did we forget Anita Hill? Did we forget that Joe Biden has been credibly accused of sexual misconduct? Closing your eyes does not clear Biden of these allegations. How could we forget how Biden responded to these allegations, or how he responded when confronted with how he has mishandled positions of trust, authority, and leadership? Did Biden respond like the champion or warrior, defender of civil and human rights in America? No, he did not. He responded like a white man in America who has never been held accountable for his failures. Even when we insist that Donald J. Trump be held accountable for each deed, as all leaders must for a democracy to succeed, we anoint Biden as a king of America, even before the election, unaccountable to lowly female subjects. As a woman, a black woman, a female descendant of U.S. slavery, I am particularly wary of those who cannot be held accountable. America is ideally, at its best, a nation where no person is above the law. Yet, because of racism and corporate greed, America allowed Donald J. Trump to reign. Now, in a last-ditch effort to correct its error, America now prepares to anoint Biden to reign. Make no mistake, the 2016 election of Donald Trump was an appointment, and the 2020 election now seeks to appoint Joseph Biden. As a woman, a black woman, and a descendant of U.S. slavery, I must warn you, neither Joseph Biden or Donald J. Trump are qualified to lead at this time. Americans are not demanding a perfect presidential candidate. We're simply demanding a candidate who is presidential and aligns with the clear values that we Americans have set for ourselves and which we are idealized for by other nations. With the nomination and acceptance of Joseph Biden as the Democratic nominee for U.S. President, we fail to adhere to the highest standards we have set for America. Only when Donald J. Trump is the alternative could Biden be a serious consideration for the office of the U.S. presidency. With his clear immaturity, lack of ability, and penchant for grudges because of his lack of leadership and experience, I am sure my name is likely being added to a list of enemies and detractors, to be ignored and penalized. Yet, what Joe Biden's privileged white male American experience does not permit him to comprehend is that as a black female descendant of U.S. government slavery, being ignored, penalized, and discriminated against by my own government is the only reality that I know, which makes me ready to die for these very words, because I already possess a far greater understanding of democracy that Joe Biden can ever claim to know from his privileged castle. Joe Biden's failures and lack of leadership has led him to incorrectly assume that any black woman nominated for U.S. Vice President will save or help black Americans. This is far from true. There is a type of black nominee that can do more harm to black communities than the KKK, and that character is found in Kamala Harris. Kamala, overwhelmingly rejected for the U.S. presidency, has always helped Kamala. Her efforts and career has served to elevate and advance Kamala personally, entitled, self-serving, and self-dealing. It isn't hard to see why Joe Biden chose Kamala. The daughter of immigrants, Kamala's public-facing U.S. career has mostly centered entirely on the personal and professional advancement of a single individual, Kamala. Of course, this self-centered focus advanced by people of color almost always proves fatal to the personal and professional advancement of one of the most vulnerable and long-suffering U.S. populations, black and brown descendants of U.S. slavery. This type of activism, perpetuated by people of color against people of color, sends a clear message to racists in the United States and around the world. Racists can achieve their goals and appear politically correct or hide racism in plain sight by tolerating, hiring, and advancing only those black and brown people, who also cause harm to black and brown people. It isn't only Kamala's commissions, but her omissions which make her so dangerous to my community. This is the clear danger of Kamala Harris. Rather than stand with, fight for, defend, protect, advance, and promote goals, ideas, and values that benefit a community, Kamala has always, from start to finish, shed like a menstrual cloth anything and anyone that gets in the way of Kamala first. This is not a woman of color I would support for the U.S. presidency, for U.S. vice president, for the Senate, or for a nursery. In fact, Kamala's appointment can only be monumental in a society where racism is flourishing. She has already proven herself to be more of a danger to Black America than Donald J. Trump himself. With Kamala, you won't see the discrimination until it's too late. I am Teresa Giovanna. These are my honest and humble opinions and experiences. And this is what gives me hope today. America, at its best, is a land not of kingmakers and autocrats, but of many diverse peoples, nations, and ideologies. I have faith that, in spite of past and present failures, Black American descendants of U.S. slavery will rise. We are not a land of kings, so this ascension will not be because of Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, or Donald Trump or Mike Pence, but because Black Americans are resilient. The American people are resilient, faith-filled warriors and advocates for social justice and change. As a Black woman, I have watched every modern social justice initiative launched during my lifetime fail to protect and defend Black people from the violence and discrimination that has long impoverished the Black community, even while according relief to similarly situated non-Black humans. This impacts me in multiple ways, but not a single one of those ways motivates me to hate or to discriminate in response. I recognize the disproportionate uphill battle faced by descendants of U.S. slavery, and I am committed to fight for redress. I cannot leave my security, well-being, and future in the hands of another. So, on election day, I, Teresa Giovanna, will cast my vote. My vote will not be for a candidate or political system. Frankly, I see no good choices here in this election. Instead, I will cast my vote for democracy, justice, redress, for the Black community, for your children and my children. And that is all I have to say at this time about my feelings on what we are all told is a historical day in America. Have a good night, all.